The phrase Linux is about choice has been circulating in the Linux world for a very, very long time. It's not exactly clear what the one origin point actually was. In fact, it very well might even just predate Linux and be used in older Unix spaces, which who knows how many of those have actually been archived, and who knows how much of that actually happened face to face. By 2004, it was already popular enough for posts like this to be made on OS News, Opinion, Linux in 2004, usability needs a facelift, and if we search for choice, there will be a bunch of comments like, Linux is about choice, and choice, and choice, lots and lots of choice. I'm sick of this pro-choice advocacy that Linux users do. Like, it's this thing where people were already arguing about it. Then, in 2008, we had this famous email sent by Andrew Jackson on Fedora Devel, Linux is about choice, and then this big rant about why Linux is not actually about choice, which has since been archived on the aptly named islinuxaboutchoice.com with very big no, and then a very small font for the actual email itself. I agree with the general sentiment here, because the way a lot of people use this phrase is sort of as this stick to just beat projects with about why they're not doing this specific thing. Why does this toggle not exist? I thought Linux was about choice. Why do I have to use systemd? Linux is about choice. Why are you phasing out X11 in favor of Wayland? Linux is about choice. Give me the choice to use X11. Why are you doing X thing that I don't personally like? Linux is about choice. And simply put, none of this is actually true. Somebody has to make those changes, and if nobody does, then it simply cannot exist. Now, if you want to pay for a support contract and actually have a paid developer working on the things that you want them to work on, hey, be my guest, that's great, we need more paid developers in the FOSS space. But a lot of people are volunteers, a lot of people are just working on the things that they personally want to work on, and things take time, things get delayed, and frankly, some things just don't get worked on because nobody wants to go and work on them. I want to approach this phrase from a bit of a different perspective. Open source isn't just a group of slaves to do your bidding. However, Linux is about choice. More generally, open source is about choice, just not in the way that a lot of people use the phrase. Linux is about the choice to control your system. If we consider Windows, let's say they adopt something that you don't personally like. Let's say it's, I don't know, pick your poison. Some new AI tooling that is forced onto every user, more telemetry. Now they want, I don't know, iris scans and fingerprints. Maybe it's some major UI overhaul like what happened with Windows 8, which at the time was very controversial, or frankly, many, many other things that Windows has done over the years. If and when this happens, what are your options? Well, one, you can try to avoid ever installing updates again. However, they're making this increasingly harder on every single new release. Also, if you do this, you are no longer getting any security updates, many of which are going to be important, leaving you with a less than secure system. You could stick to an older version of Windows, so you can go back to a Windows 8, or if you're on Windows 11, go back to Windows 10, which is now EOL, and won't get any more of those updates. Again, you're no longer getting these important security updates, leaving yourself in a potentially vulnerable position. Or you could use whatever means Microsoft allows you to access to modify your system. I don't know how many of you know this, but you actually can run a custom shell on Windows and have a completely custom desktop. You can do some registry edits, and there's various other things you can do, but Microsoft ultimately has the final say in what can be done. If at some point they say, okay, you can no longer modify this thing, maybe there's a workaround, maybe there's an exploit, but maybe they patch that as well, and you just don't really have a choice here. You're on Windows, you're gonna do what Microsoft says. Now let's talk about what happened on the Linux side, and let's go with an example which has all been hashed out, which nobody really cares about anymore: Ubuntu and Unity. When Ubuntu swapped from GNOME to Unity, and then a few years later, from Unity back to GNOME. When this happened, when actually both of these happened, a lot of people were very annoyed. There were a lot of people that didn't like Unity. There were a lot of people that then loved Unity and didn't like GNOME, because a lot of people, they might have started using Ubuntu during this period. Maybe they got comfortable with it. They just started really vibing with Unity and didn't like things to change, or before things actually happened, they liked GNOME as it was and didn't want to go to Unity in the first place. What could people do in this situation? Of course, a lot of complaining, but the next best thing, and the thing that's actually going to improve your life to some extent, was swapping to a different distro, which now aligned with what you wanted. If you didn't like the fact that you were going from GNOME to Unity, just swap to a distro that was shipping GNOME. If you didn't like going from Unity back to GNOME, swap to a distro that was shipping Unity. Now, of course, some of those distros may not be as well maintained as Ubuntu, but because they're a completely separate team, very possibly it could be much, much better and actually focus on the things that you really care about. Maybe you really care about having modern, up-to-date packages, and something like an Arch Linux or a Gentoo was just a far better choice for you in the long run. Or, because you're on Ubuntu, maybe you just went to another flavor of Ubuntu that more aligned with what you wanted. Of course, with the flavors, they do have to listen to what Canonical wants them to do. There is guidelines for being an official flavor. With a remix that is unofficial, whole different story, but something that is listed on the Ubuntu website, yeah, of course. But when it comes to anything else, when it comes to, let's say you went from Ubuntu to Fedora at the time, Fedora doesn't need to care what Canonical is doing. They don't have to listen to a single policy they have. They can do things entirely independently, and Canonical, they have no say. There is no overarching body that defines how everything has to work on Linux. Yeah, of course, there are these groups that work together on similar kinds of things and try to define standards and try to get other people to adopt these standards, but that's just a group of people. You don't actually have to listen to them. You could just go and maybe look for some third-party packaging and then install the desktop through that method. Of course, third-party packaging, whether or not it's going to be good, is entirely up to the individual packaging. To be fair, some first-party packaging has been a bit of a mess over the years as well. Or, and this is your real power, you could just go and do your own thing. Whether that means just packaging the desktop you want to use yourself or whatever software it happens to be, or if nothing right now happens to align with what you want to use, going and starting up your own project, whether that be from scratch or as a fork, you can just do that. There is nobody saying you can't install that on the distro you're using, or even better yet, Linux is just the kernel, right? Like, we've all heard Linux is just the kernel, Linux is just the kernel, Linux is not an operating system. You can just make your own distro as well. Like, that's just a thing that you can do. I don't know exactly where this came from. Maybe it's just the fact that as Linux gets more and more popular, the percentage of non-techie people that are using Linux also seems to be increasing. But there is this kind of learned helplessness that exists on Linux now, where if nobody is willing to do something for you, then that thing simply cannot be done, right? Your distro or your desktop, it is swapping to Wayland. There is no X11 session that's going to be available. Therefore, Wayland is being forced on me. The Rust user space tooling or Rust kernel code is being adopted. Therefore, Rust is being forced on me. Going back further, you have the adoption of systemd and Pulse Audio, or now Pipewire. These are being forced on me. And this is just throwing away the greatest power that you have on Linux. You can just do your own thing. You have control over your machine and the code that you want to run on it. You don't have to abide by mainstream Linux distros, mainstream Linux choices, if you just don't want to. Yeah, you can absolutely go run a normal distro like a Fedora or an Ubuntu or CashOS or SteamOS or anything like that, But if you want to do something weird and maybe use BusyBox and run it and have a desktop powered by Archon. Archon is a project that a lot of you probably don't even know exists. Archon is actually it's like a third option from X11 and Wayland. I guess Mia was a third option at one point, then Mia became Wayland. This is a very niche, very tiny option out there, but you can use Archon if you want to. You could then run all of this on some non-x86 architecture like, I don't know, PowerPC, and yeah, maybe someone is gonna laugh at you. Maybe people are gonna make fun of you. Maybe absolutely no one is going to help you, and you will have to maintain and package and support the entire stack yourself. But absolutely no one can stop you from doing so. It is your choice. It is your freedom to do exactly that. Somebody one day said, I'm gonna make a herd version of Debian. They did exactly that. Now, is this something that you are going to use? Is this something I'm going to use? Hey, very possibly not. I'm sure there is at least one Debian herd user that is watching this, and if you are, tell me why. I'd like to know why. But this only exists because somebody said, I'm going to take advantage of the power I've been given and actually go and do something. Somebody else said, hello everybody out there using Minix. I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU, for 386, 486, AT clones. This has been brewing since April and is starting to get ready. I'd like any feedback on things people like/dislike on Minix, as my OS resembles it somewhat, same physical layout of the file system, due to practical reasons among other things. P.S. Yes, it's free of any Minix code and has a multi-threaded file system. And this someone was a 21-year-old Linus Benedict Torvalds, the only reason why Linux actually exists in the first place. Because someone said, I'm gonna go and make it. Someone said, it doesn't exist. Let's make it happen. This GNU thing, hey, maybe that'll be out at some point because there's a whole long story about Linux and GNU Herd and how GNU Herd was supposed to come out a couple of years earlier, but it didn't. And if it did, very likely Linux never would have been made in the first place. But it did get made. And now we have it. If you're like me and you like Wayland, couldn't care less about systemd, really don't care about the language that a project is written in, as long as the project is fast, I don't care about Rust at all. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing and enjoy your system. But if you don't like it, if you want to keep using X11, go use Xorg, go use Xlibre, go use the upcoming Phoenix server or the Y server whenever those happen to be somewhat in a good state. Go and support those projects and go and use them. Go get involved, whether that be through monetarily supporting it with code, supporting it with documentation, promotion, anything like that. Go and support forks of desktops that are keeping X11 around. Go and support projects that are not even considering the existence of a Wayland version. Go and support projects that don't use systemd, that don't have systemd as a dependency, and if no project aligns with the goals you currently have, be the one to make that project. Because if you're having these ideas, you're having these thoughts about what your system could possibly be, I don't want to use this thing, I don't want to use that thing, very likely other people think the same thing as well. Now, it might be 5 people out there, it might not be that many, but if you just want to sit around and complain, hey, I love complaining as well, that is your prerogative, feel free to complain as much as you want. But maybe, just maybe, take advantage of that choice you've been given and go and control the code that you are running on your system. Go and start a project, go and fork something, go and make a distro that aligns with what you want to do, and you might not change what mainstream Linux is doing. Very likely, you won't change what mainstream Linux is doing. But who cares about that? Because you don't have to be part of the mainstream usage. I know nothing is going to change and we're not going to have this big uprising of new developers that are getting involved in things. But you know what? I can at least go and complain and make some noise about it at the very least. Look, at the end of the day, if you want to complain, that's your right to do so. Feel free to complain, but you have options and you might as well use those options. So let me know your thoughts down below. What are you currently running? Is there anything about the system you have that you don't like, that you don't feel like is possible to change, or you maybe have gone and changed? I would love to know. So if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and use that choice to click the like button. And the hype one. There's a hype thing as well on mobile. Something like this.